Coming to you from South Florida, the Casey Ingram Show broadcasts from the heart of the Manatee Pocket, atop the Fish House District and a marina, Port Salerno's hidden gem. Now here's Casey Ingram Unleashed.
Sitting in the shadows, Ingram calls the shots. Speaking truth to power where the rebels lost. Forces rising, anger crackles through the air. Casey's being unleashed, raising hell without a care.
You ever stop and think about how Florida, this tropical paradise we call home, almost didn't happen? I mean, not in the way we know it today. Without one little invention, air conditioning, Florida might still be mostly alligators, mosquitoes, and retirees with stronger wills than heat tolerance. But when AC came along, well, it was game over. People came pouring in, and in 1950, Florida had just 2.7 million people. And now, here we are. Over 23 million of us packed between the Everglades and the Atlantic like sardines in a public sub. And listen, I get it. Florida is beautiful. Who wouldn't want to live here? We've got endless coastlines, magical springs, forests teeming with wildlife, and skies that turn shades of orange and pink. So perfect, you would think Bob Ross painted them himself. But with all this demand for land comes a real dilemma. Development is inevitable. Heck, most of us are probably living on what was once a swamp, a pine flatwood, or some unfortunate turtle's front yard. But just because we built our homes doesn't mean we have to pave over everything that is left. That's where the responsibility comes in, because once we pour concrete over a piece of natural Florida, it's gone. No do-overs, no, oops, let's bring the habitat back. And that's why we're seeing some major initiatives to protect what's left of wild Florida. People are starting to wake up and say, wait a second, maybe we don't need a strip mall next to the Manatee Sanctuary. Which brings me to something I never in my wildest, swampiest dreams thought I'd have to say. A bill. An actual bill has been filed to stop golf courses and hotels from being built in our state parks. Yes, state parks. You know, those protected places where you go to escape traffic, noise, and tourists wearing socks and sandals. Someone somewhere thought, you know what's missing from this pristine Florida wilderness? A hotel. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of a state park, I think of kayaking through the mangroves, spotting deer at dawn, maybe catching a glimpse of a panther if I'm lucky, not teeing off on the ninth hole while a confused heron watches with dread. And let's be honest, Florida does not have a golf course shortage. They're seemingly everywhere. So why would we sacrifice our untouched natural areas to build even more? This bill that really shouldn't need to exist is basically a last stand to keep developers from turning our state parks into their luxury resort brochure. And if that doesn't scream Florida in 2025, I don't know what does. Look, I'm not saying all development is bad. Growth is natural. Change happens. But if we don't draw the line somewhere, soon the only thing left of wild Florida will be the name of a theme park attraction. So today we're talking about the fight to save what's left, the people stepping up, and what we can do to make sure that Florida stays, well, Florida. Not just a paradise paved over with good intentions and bad zoning decisions. Because at the end of the day, we can build more houses, more roads, more golf courses. But we can't build another Everglades. We can't build a 5,000-year-old cypress swamp. And we sure as hell can't bring back a species once it's gone. So Florida, what's it going to be? A paradise or a parking lot? We're here to talk about it today. Today in the studio, I have my wonderful guest. I'm going to start here to my left, Barbara Birdsey, Jeffrey Smith, and Greg Braun. They are here to talk about a couple things, mainly the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters project. And Barbara, I'm going to start with you and give a little background for the listeners. Barbara is the founder of the Pegasus Foundation, a nonprofit organization committed to animal protection and environmental preservation in the Orenda Wildlife Trust. Prior to that, she was licensed social worker for the Department of Social Services, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She graduated from Boston University with a BA in psychology and from Bridgewater State College with a master's in counseling. Her passion for wildlife started as a child growing up on the waterfronts of Cape Cod. Since then, she has devoted her career to preserving the natural habitats that define her childhood memories. Previously, she founded the Orenda Wildlife Land Trust in Massachusetts, and she was a founding member of the Cape Cod Stranding Network. Barbara divides her time between Florida and New Hampshire, where she spends time with her husband Dave and their 3 children and 3 grandchildren. She also continues to pursue her interest in various environmental projects. She currently serves on the board of directors of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound, the Guardians of Martin County, the Pegasus Foundation, International Fund of Animal Welfare, the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, the Treasured Lands Foundation, and the Charles Thompson Land Fund Committee of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust. She is also on the advisory boards of the Wild Dolphin Project and the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies. Boy, you are busy. Don't know how you keep on going every day. We're going to talk about this. And then on the end, I have Greg Braun. He's a professional ecologist with over 20 years of experience in environmental projects in Florida, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean. Greg specializes in avian and coastal ecology and habitat restoration projects. Certified by the Academy of Board Certified Environmental Professionals, Greg's Jupiter, Florida-based company provides ecological consulting services to governmental agencies, non-governmental conservation organizations, and private property owners. He serves on the steering committee of the Southeast Florida Scrub Ecosystem Working Group and the board of directors of the Martin County chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. Greg was awarded the William Hornaday Award for Distinguished Services in Conservation in 2007, the Distinguished Services Award from the Martin County Conservation Alliance in 2001, and was honored with Florida Garden Club's Earth Steward Award in 2024. A graduate of Florida Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Science degree in Oceanography, Greg works with a variety of threatened and endangered animals and plants, including Florida scrub jays, manatees, gopher tortoises, Johnson seagrass, and a variety of beach, dune, and estuarine species. Greg is here today in his capacity as a chairman of the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Initiative, a joint project by the Conservation Fund, the Treasured Lands Foundation, and the Guardians of Martin County. The Guardians are a local nonprofit organization that advocates for growth management and balancing natural resource protection with economic growth through living responsibly. And Jeffrey Smith, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know that you appreciate you coming down here today, and locally here in Martin County, we know Jeffrey Smith and the gallery that you have.
I've been here about 30 years, and I'm probably most known for the big sailfish in downtown Stewart Sailfish.
Hugely landmark, hugely.
Did that about, I think, 24 years ago or so it's been there. And since then, I've done a number of large monumental sculptures throughout the county, quite a few, actually. The whole county is like a sculpture garden for my work, which is wonderful. And my work focuses primarily on the animals, the birds, the animals. And so while I'm here, I'm trying to shine the light on the beauty that's out there that, most people don't realize what's beyond our front door, our windows, the roadsides. There's so much wildlife and so much beautiful areas in Martin County. We're really, really lucky. I was installing a large sculpture at Indian Riverside Park. There's a pair of life and a half-scale frigate birds. The whole sculpture is in a beautiful fountain that's 14, 15 feet tall. And I had people walking by when we were installing it asking what kind of birds they were. I said, they're magnificent frigate birds. And they said, well, do we have those here? And I'm like, they're soaring overhead. You just have to slow down and look. And so I've been with Barbara and Greg, and I love going out in these areas that we're trying to protect, the headwaters of the Loxa-Lucie, of the Loxahatchee and the St. Lucie River. They all kind of flow together. It's a beautiful wetlands, and so I've spent a lot of time out there filming and photographing and painting, and a lot of inspiration for my artwork.
And it truly takes a team. It takes a village, and that's what we're here today to let the audience know what the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Initiative is all about, what it's done already, and there's still so much more to do. So Greg, I'm going to go to you now, and if you could tell us a little bit, what is the Loxa-Lucie Headwater Project and what is its purpose?
Yes, well, thank you for having us back.
My pleasure.
We talked about this, probably 2 or 3 years ago when the project was in its infancy. And overall, this is an initiative, a grassroots initiative by, as you indicated, the Guardians of Martin County, the Treasured Lands Foundation, and hence Barbara's involvement, and the Conservation Fund, a nationwide conservation and land management, land stewardship organization. And the inspiration for this project, called the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters, actually came a few years ago after the passing of Nathaniel Reed. Most of your viewers will know the name and recognize that recently the Hobe National Wildlife Refuge was named in his honor. Well, the Reed family has quite a long legacy of protecting lands in the vicinity of Jupiter Island. The whole northern end of the island is either state park or National Wildlife Refuge. The Blowing Rocks property at the south end of Jupiter Island came into the Nature Conservancy's ownership as a result of the Reed family. So after he passed, Barbara came to me and she said, we'd like to do something in his honor. And wouldn't it be great to identify and designate this corridor along Bridge Road as something that we can protect in his honor? The Guardians thought that was a great idea, but through my work in the county for several decades, I was aware that the lands on both the north and the south of Bridge Road are within the areas that the state parks plural, would like to own. Most everybody knows Jonathan Dickinson, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But I think one of the hidden gems in Martin County is the Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Park. Several thousand acres of mostly natural lands. They're kind of tucked away off there on the south side of Cove Road. So it's kind of hard to get to. There aren't great big signs like there are at Jonathan Dickinson. But the southern boundary of Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Park is just a couple miles from the northern end of Jonathan Dickinson. So we took off on Barbara's suggestion of preserving an east-west corridor, and we said, let's broaden this and actually make a connection between the two state parks. So generally, the area that our project encompasses is west of the US 1 corridor in Hobe Sound and east of I-95, and essentially from Cove Road on the north down to Jonathan Dickinson State Park in the south. So if you drive Bridge Road very often, you'll see for sale sign after for sale sign after for sale sign, and then throw into that mix a couple of those county-required notices of comp plan changes, which is the first step towards something going in there. And so the opportunity that we saw is knowing that the state has wanted to acquire these properties for years. How can we actually move that whole project forward? So one of the graphics that I'd like to show to everybody is the state of Florida's project map for something called the Atlantic Ridge Ecosystem. So the state of Florida's land buying program is called Florida Forever.
Okay.
It's a very competitive program. There's hundreds of projects that are on the list. And this Atlantic Ridge ecosystem, which is bounded on the west by the I-95 corridor and generally by US 1 on the east, has been on the state's list for decades. And the state has bought exactly 0 acres. So our initiative, we went up to Tallahassee and we said, we've been on this list for a long time. How can we actually get into the money and acquire some of these properties? And they said, well, there's 2 things you need to do. Number 1 is nobody's been up here advocating for us to buy this land. So you need to show us, is there any local support? So we thought, put that in the back of our mind. And the second thing is the lands here in Southeast Florida are very expensive when you compare them to lands up in the Panhandle and other areas of Florida. So we're at a competitive disadvantage when the folks in Tallahassee are trying to figure out how to allocate limited resources. So they said anything that you can do that will lower that cost to the state, that will help your ranking as well. So we came back to Martin County and we recognized what our marching orders were, and the Loxa-Lucie Initiative, Headwaters Initiative, got started as a result of that. So how we got our name is, let's talk a little bit about that, because Loxa, this grand area, the southern end of it, is in the headwaters for the Loxa-Lucie River and Kitchen Creek in particular, where Jeffrey has been kayaking and taking videos and all. And the northern part of it flows into the South Fork of the St. Lucie. So that's how we get Loxa-Lucie. And then headwaters is kind of a difficult thing for a lot of people to grasp. You know, what are headwaters? And it's essentially those areas that they're not flowing enough that you can canoe or kayak down them. And during the dry season, you may go squish as you walk through them, but they're not really real wet. So what happens during the dry season is those wetland areas, they fill up and then they start flowing either north to the South Fork of the St. Lucie or south down to Loxa-Lucie. So the reason that those areas along Bridge Road have not been developed is there's a higher percentage of wetlands than there are uplands. And so it has just been not economically feasible to put housing or strip malls or anything else in that area.
And it's a very special project as well. And, you know, as I hear you talking, I think how fortunate we are here in Martin County, but this is an issue across the state of Florida. So the right groups of people came together here in Martin County to help preserve, and I think others could use it as an example of how to conserve and preserve lands. Bridge Road in particular, there's some development behind one of the acquisitions that you have, but as you're driving down the road, it looks pristine, it looks wildlife, and you don't see the development that we don't want to see. It's very beautiful to drive down that road, and I think it makes it very special to be able to conserve that as well. Greg, you have already purchased 3 phases into this Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Initiative, and you've just talked a little bit about those. I'm going to put up a map that shows the different acquisitions. You're kind of showing how they flow into each other and how important it is in the overall scheme of things, but there's more work to be done. So we're going to talk a lot about the Loxa-Lucie, but what's the more work and what other lands can you purchase or what are you targeting?
Right. Well, we set up a steering committee that has representatives from these different organizations on them. And what we do is evaluate the parcels that are for sale, what sort of environmental value they have right now, and how they can help in protecting the wetlands, stopping saltwater intrusion, preventing flooding, and that sort of thing. So we have this priority list of properties that we would like to buy. And so our initial effort was a private fundraising initiative. Get the donations, all made through the conservation funds of tax-deductible donations, and then start acquiring the properties that are the most important for these kinds of purposes. So we were very pleased that the community stepped up and we were able to purchase a 2.5-mile frontage on the north side of Bridge Road. And so you can see the picture back here of one of the signs of those. And if you drive Bridge Road, you'll see these signs at the beginning and the ends of our various properties. And so once the community saw these signs and saw that, wow, we purchased a pretty good size of that stretch between US 1 and I-95, we started getting more community support. And so we have gone out to a variety of homeowners associations and governmental groups, non-governmental environmental groups and others. And we're very pleased with the high level of support for the whole initiative. We've raised several $1 million already. And the goal here is we can now go back to the state and say, we will give you these properties. You know, the Guardians don't want to own them. The Conservation Fund doesn't want to own them. The Land Trust doesn't want to own them and manage them, but the state does. So we can go give these properties to the state. We'll be assured that they're going to be managed as parklands in perpetuity. And that will help us in getting the additional Florida Forever matching funds.
And that was an initiative here in Martin County, again, the Martin County Forever half-cent tax that passed overwhelmingly in the community, where they're purchasing, they had different IRL blueways. Part of it was for the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Project, and Palmar, which is another area here for conservation land. So you're working in conjunction with that organization in particular to help gather funding. And as you just said, you bring some money to the table and it's a matching grant. Sometimes helps the state help us purchase these more expensive properties and larger properties. Yeah,
so we were very pleased that the voters in Martin County supported that referendum back in November. by a wide margin. And that really is sort of the next step in Martin County voters' long history of stepping up for these kinds of programs. It started back in the 1970s with a group called the Save Our Beaches. So those who use the beaches up on Hutchinson Island, you see Tiger Shores and Bob Graham Beach and all those. Those were purchased as a result of that initiative that was started by the high school students at Martin County High School. They said, let's try to find some money to acquire these properties while we can. So it started then, back in the late 1980s. There was the Lands for You program. And then a decade or so later, there was a program called the Lands for Healthy Rivers that was acquiring some of these properties. So we go to Halpatioke Park and some of these others, Alapata, big thousands of acres out west, were all purchased as a result of Martin County voters stepping up and saying, yes, we will tax ourselves to be able to acquire these properties.
In fact, Martin County has had the tagline, enjoy our good nature. So it's always been very much oriented to preserving what is special here in Florida and Martin County. Barbara, you focus a lot on community outreach and outreach to support this initiative. What are you doing to go out in the community, bring in more support, and what kind of reaction are you finding when you're out speaking with people about this?
Well, the first thing that I think people realize when you start talking about preservation of land is if you've ever flown over the coast and you come down the coast and all of a sudden there's this green jewel called Martin County. And you keep flying further south and the green jewel becomes cement and houses. And I think people understand what that means, but what we're trying to do is bring the public in, and of course the other organizations that Greg has mentioned, to say it's not inevitable that we're going to look like every other county. We can make a difference. We do have the opportunity. We're blessed that this beautiful oval-shaped treasure that we're trying to protect didn't get developed for all of the reasons that Greg mentioned. It stayed pretty much in its natural state, not completely. Obviously, it's grazed, and a lot of exotics have taken over. But the concept, I think people can accept pretty easily, that we have these two magnificent parks, and we need to connect them together in a way that they traditionally were. And so one of the things that we've done is to create a community garden concept, and that community garden concept was from one of our members, Sal Orfino. He said, why don't we have a community garden? We'll start in Hope Sound. So in Zeus Park, there is a beautiful community garden. And the purpose was to bring nature into the community. Not too many people are going to have the opportunity to go out in depth and view these properties and hike through the wetlands and all of that. But the idea that there's recognition within the community, I think is very important. And what they have dedicated this to, what we are dedicating it to, is this community garden is for all people in Hope Sound, named after the native tribe here, the Jaga Indians. The garden is a reminder that we draw our food from the land, sun, bees, and water. By caring for our food, we care for one another. And so the people that have gone there, it's open to the public to ask for a raised garden, and there's some native plantings which we hope to enhance, to have a nature path in there, is one way that we're trying to reach out to the public. We hope these community gardens will, the idea will be picked up in other areas. Also, as Greg said, we try to participate in talks with homeowners associations. When there's an opportunity with a public event, we try to man a table and show the films that we have and talk to people one-on-one about what we're doing. And I have to say that right now, there's so much increased energy with the half-cent sales tax coming on board that we're able to look realistically at the hope for acquisition of some of the major pieces that are out there, but certainly out of our reach. And so by working together with the other organizations involved in this, and the county and the state, we're hoping to see that green jewel remain forever.
And that's working with the landowners. And I know I had Martin County Forever on the show before, and they talked about they're not going in to make anybody overly rich. They're going to pay market value, but you have willing sellers, and now we have the money to purchase it, which is so important. Greg, you touched on something earlier that you talked about the land, once it's purchased, is actually going to be turned over to the state parks for management in perpetuity, right? So last summer, we were all shocked, and I mentioned it in my monologue about how there was going to be golf courses proposed and hotels and pickleball courts in our state parks. And since then, there was a public uproar like we've never seen here in Florida. And Senator Harrell has introduced SB 80, and Representative John Snyder has introduced HB 209, the State Park Preservation Act requires public hearings for all updated conservation and non-conservation land management plans, requiring the Division of Recreation and Parks for the Department of Environmental Protection to comply with specified provisions when granting certain privileges, leases, concessions, and permits, and requiring that individual management plans for parcels located within state parks be developed and updated with input from advisory groups, etc. She introduced this bill in December 2024, and we're so grateful somebody's taking the lead on that. However, there's been a lot of groups, about 70 of them, that have looked at this bill, and they're hoping there's going to be a little bit more teeth to this bill. So I'd like you to just touch on that. What more could we see with that bill to help protect our state parks? Because people were upset. We do not want hotels and pickleball courts at our state parks.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to fight this battle every few years. And indeed, the furor that was generated last late summer was actually a reincarnation of something that happened about 10 years ago. And so it's unfortunate that we have to keep battling for our state parks. But Senator Harrell and Representative Snyder's bills do take a step towards trying to prevent those activities on the state parks. We don't think that they go far enough. But let's talk about a little bit of the details of that, because I think it is important. The state parks are currently required to put together these land management plans. They're called unit management plans. Every state park in the system has to put one together. And it does require involvement by stakeholder groups to let them know what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And there's always sort of a mixture of preservation and recreational use. And so, there are cabins at Jonathan Dickinson, and if you've ever tried to get a reservation at one, it's tough to do. There's high demand for it, but that's partially because those cabins there's relatively few of them. They're in a nice, pristine setting. Mm-hmm. So the folks in Tallahassee that led to the Great Outdoors Initiative last year, they were thinking, let's monetize our state parks. If cabins are good, let's put some more cabins in there. And if golf is in such great demand, let's put a golf course or two, or in the case of Jonathan Dickinson, 3 golf courses. Those aren't in the current management plans for that state park or where the 300-room hotel was up in one of the other state parks. And so there is this process to amend the management plan. But what Senator Harrell and Representative Snyder's bills will require is that short of these management plans that get updated every 10 years, it's stopping the ability for somebody to kind of sneak something in without the general public seeing. And that's what happened last August and September. So the bills are a step in that direction. They do identify things that are inappropriate for use. And so I don't think we're going to see 300-room hotels being proposed in any of the state parks. But the bills do not prevent those kinds or some of those kinds of activities. So, we don't think that any sort of non-resource-based recreation is appropriate in the state parks, and it doesn't close that loophole. If the pickleballers or anybody else wants to come in, the current the way the bill states is that those uses are to be considered by the Acquisition and Restoration Council, and they are to be focused in areas of the state parks that are already disturbed. Well, we don't think it should be that way. Yes, if there is some new development, you'd prefer for it to be in areas of the state park that have been impacted by previous work. But if you look at Jonathan Dickinson and the history of that as a military facility back from decades ago, there is still some evidence of old roads and old buildings and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, yes, it is disturbed, but the environment to the untrained eye, it looks like it's natural kinds of stuff.
Earth is reclaiming what she once had already. So if we come back in and use the example, it's already been disturbed, even though it's well on its way to being completely reclaimed, that they could use it as an excuse to put in the pickleball courts or whatever. So if you give it an inch, they take a mile kind of thing. And, these are our state parks. We're not talking about our county parks. We're talking about our state parks, folks. And these should be set aside in perpetuity for future generations. Like, as I said in the beginning, once it's gone, it's gone. So now is the time, and that's where 70 organizations, correct, have signed a letter saying we need a little more strength to this bill.
Right. The Guardians were one of those local organizations. But nonprofit groups around the state and some of the statewide organizations, the Florida Native Plant Society and others have all suggested that during the legislative session, we need to bulk things up a little bit with those two bills rather than try to weaken them. There's always going to be an attempt to monetize the state parks because so many people do want to go to them. But at the same time, we need to preserve them for the natural features that make them worthwhile.
As we grow and continue to develop, they're one of the last bastions we have in Florida to protect. So that Senate bill has successfully passed the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee. It's moving through legislature, so we'll definitely be watching that as we move through session this March and April. So,
and one of the issues about that it causes angst to a lot of people is there's a provision that if it's determined that the state is not living up to its land management plan, the state could decide to get rid of that state park. And so our concern is that if there is inadequate funding, then the state park will not be able to keep up with that management plan. And then the state would have the ability through this regulation to say, well, let's just do something else with it, put housing in it or whatever. Now, the great example of that right now is for those who have been down to Jonathan Dickinson anytime recently, that the observation tower is closed down. You can't climb it now.
I didn't realize that.
Well, it's been closed for a couple of years. And it's because they have not had the financial resources to rebuild it. And granted, there are some ADA initiatives that's going to make it more expensive to do. So this is probably an extremely cynical perspective. But somebody could come in and say, your 10-year management plan for Jonathan Dickinson says you're going to keep this observation tower up and accessible to the public. You haven't done that in the last 2 years. You're not in compliance with your plan. Let's do something else with this state park. Well, that's not the way it should go. The state should be providing the funding to be able to keep up with the things that are in the management plan.
Not every inch of the state of Florida should have an ROI requirement, return on investment requirement. There's some things that are worth protecting, and that's what our tax dollars are for. So that's why it's so important right now, because you all have such a great initiative with the Loxa-Lucie Headwaters project to conserve lands, and it gets turned over to the state parks. And what if? That's people's concern. So right now is the time for us to stand up and be strong. Jeffrey, what do you say to folks out there that are really just learning about how our park system is working, and wait a minute, they have to pass a law to not put up a hotel or a pickleball court? It's a little surprising to folks that are just moving to Florida.
doesn't seem real. It's amazing, and all I would say get out and go to the park. Jonathan Dickinson is a fabulous place. We have the scrub jays. They're very endangered. That's their key habitat right there in Jonathan Dickinson, and they're a very friendly bird. They come up close to you, and they're really a beautiful scrub jay, and that's something most people never see. And the only place I know you're going to see them in the wild. And that development was all through that critical habitat. And the park, we want people. There's wonderful hiking trails. There's biking trails. I mountain bike through that. That goes right through scrub jay habitat. They seem to get along fine with the bikers. But it's a great area, and getting out the Loxa-Lucie River comes through there. The manatees are in there. The crocodiles. You can take a kayak up to Trapper Nelson's. It's a fabulous resource, and unfortunately, sometimes it's enjoyed more by people from out of state or out of town than the people who live here, because we get busy doing our things, and we pass over it. So we have lots of beautiful state parks, and as Greg said earlier, the whole north end of Jupiter Island is basically undeveloped, and thanks to the Reed family. But I'm out there almost every day, and it's very few people. You hardly see anybody, but there's bobcats on the beach. There's turtles. I mean, it's a remote, beautiful spot, and we just need to take the time and know where it is, how to get there, and I think the more people immerse themselves, the noise and everything, even though Martin County is this beautiful green area, the developed areas are noisy and congested, and we still have areas we can get out to. And
so we're so appreciative that Jeffrey has taken an interest in what we're doing, because I think one of the challenges that we've got is, I can show slides and that sort of thing to try to engage people, but the artwork that he does really inspires people. And so I think that's a big advantage of how we have been able to get the series of endorsements.
And I was just going to say, Jeffrey has a gallery here in Port Salerno, and your career is inspired by Wild Florida. And if you get a chance to go into that gallery, take a look at your work, it's awe-inspiring. I was fortunate to be there a few weeks ago. It's absolutely incredible, the work that you have in that gallery. And it's Wild Florida. It's what we want to protect and what we want to preserve. And if you come down and just take a look at that, and I think that's where people will get inspired to help donate money, right, Barbara, to help preserve what we have, because we do see it slipping away so quickly. There's so many developments, and we're seeing animals killed on the side of the road and displaced, and like never before. So, folks, now is the time to get out. Reach out to Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Initiative. Reach out to the Guardians of Martin County, 1,000 Friends of Florida. So many organizations out there, and let's continue to work together to preserve our wonderful and beautiful Florida, because again, once it's gone, it's gone. And as you come down here into Port Salerno, you need to escape to the Fish House District and Marina on the breathtaking Manatee Pocket. We're sitting here today. It's anchored by the Pearl, the new swanky hotspot serving up fresh seafood, craft cocktails, and an unforgettable vibe. Explore the district, unwind by the water, and top it all off with ice cream at Captain Hook's, best ice cream in Martin County, or aerial yoga at the OM Shack. From laid-back days to lively nights, there's something for everyone. Come see what the buzz is all about right here in the heart of the Manatee Pocket. Jeffrey Smith, your gallery is right down the street from that. Lots happening here in Port Salerno. Appreciate you all coming on the show today. Our time flies by as always. We're going to close out the show with a very special video. Barbara, I'll let you kind of tell us what the video is with Jeffrey Corwin.
Yeah, Jeff Corwin, who's an old friend of mine. Years ago, he wanted to save a rainforest in South America, and he was young. I said, go for it. We helped support him do that. So we stayed in touch. And he loves Martin County, loves coming here, loves visiting here, spends as much time as he can coming up while he's filming in Miami. But he agreed to do a very passionate short video about the fact that this is still doable. We can save this beautiful resource. And I think Jeffrey illuminates really well what I think the conservation movement is all about. People kind of think about it, well, they're out there in the trees and bushes, but it's not. It's also a huge art movement. Telling the story through art has become huge. The garden that I mentioned, the community came together. Some of the artists painted a huge mural on the wall behind the garden. There's just so many ways that the story can be told, and it needs to be told. So anyways, enjoy the film.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg Braun, Jeffrey Smith, Barbara Birdsey.
Hi, I'm Jeff Corwin. My work as a television producer and presenter of wildlife documentaries has allowed me to tell stories of nature from around the world. But my most favorite stories have been right here in beautiful Florida. Florida is home to some of the most spectacular wild species and unique habitats found nowhere else on Earth. When it comes to biodiversity in North America, Florida is simply unmatched. Florida is my favorite place to explore, work, and play. But unfortunately today, wild Florida is in serious jeopardy from the loss of critical habitat. But while much of wild Florida is in a state of peril, in Martin County, nature is sustained because precious wild spaces have been protected. You see, people come from around the world to experience the wild splendor of Martin County. Unfortunately, though, at this very moment, we face a new challenge threatening the survival of Martin County's natural heritage. A wave of new commercial and residential development threatens the last remaining intact wild habitat in this region. But the great news is that it's not too late, but only if we all work together. We are likely the last generation to determine if wild Florida survives for future generations. So, what's the solution? We now have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a comprehensive and environmentally sustainable plan for commercial and residential development that allows both wild Florida and good business to prosper. Paramount to this partnership is a groundbreaking wild greenway that connects critical habitats, both large and small, creating a vibrant living corridor for wildlife to thrive. This unprecedented partnership recognizes mutual interests of all community participants, from conservation to commerce. This sustainable mission is just plain Florida common sense. Most importantly, it is a win-win for nature and the business community. The Loxa-Lucie Headwaters Initiative and the Martin County Conservation Initiative ensures that the wild treasures of Florida will be there for our children and many generations to come.